December 30th, 1916. A frozen river in St. Petersburg. The ice cracks as they pull his body from the water. Twice shot, poisoned, beaten, and still breathing when they threw him in. His name was Grigory Rasputin, and he had been the most powerful man in Russia. But here's what they don't teach you in history class. Rasputin wasn't killed because he was a drunk mystic who corrupted the royal family. He wasn't murdered because of his wild parties or his hypnotic eyes. He was killed because he knew something so dangerous that it threatened to destroy the very foundation of the Russian Empire. A secret so explosive that over a century later, Russia still won't admit it. You're about to discover the truth they've buried for generations. This is the real reason Rasputin had to die. To understand the secret that killed Rasputin, we need to go back to a time when Russia teetered on the edge of collapse, and one man held the fate of an empire in his calloused peasant hands. The year is 1905. Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin, a name that would become synonymous with manipulation and dark mysticism, arrives in St. Petersburg. He's not yet the feared mad monk of legend. He's simply a wandering holy man from the remote Siberian village of Pokrovskoye. But Rasputin carries with him something more dangerous than any weapon: knowledge of the human psyche that won't be understood by mainstream psychology for decades. Modern neurologists would recognize what Rasputin intuitively understood: the power of focused attention, rhythmic speech, and psychological manipulation. What medieval Russia called holy magnetism, we now know as sophisticated techniques of hypnosis and behavioral conditioning. The Russian aristocracy, drowning in superstition and desperate for meaning in their crumbling world, became his laboratory. Within months, whispers of the mysterious Siberian spread through the salons of St. Petersburg. He could heal the sick. He could see into souls. He could predict the future. But it was one particular healing that would seal his fate and reveal the secret that would eventually kill him. October 1912, the Spala hunting lodge. Tsarevich Alexei, the future emperor of Russia, the hope of the Romanov dynasty, lies dying. The 11-year-old heir to the throne writhes in agony, blood pooling in his joints, his internal organs slowly shutting down. The doctors stand, helpless. The Tsar paces in despair. The Tsarina Alexandra falls to her knees in prayer. Hemophilia, the royal disease, a genetic curse that had haunted European royalty for generations. But here's what the history books won't tell you. Alexei's condition wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a state secret that threatened the very legitimacy of Romanov rule. In autocratic Russia, the Tsar was God's representative on earth. Divine blood flowed through royal veins. How could the chosen dynasty carry a genetic flaw? How could God's anointed be defective? The royal family had spent years hiding the truth. Palace doctors were sworn to secrecy. Court officials spread carefully crafted lies about the boy's delicate constitution. And then, Rasputin walked into the room. What happened next would be debated for over a century. But the boy lived. The bleeding stopped. Within hours, Alexei was asking for food. The doctors called it impossible. The Tsar called it a miracle. The Tsarina called it proof that Rasputin was sent by God himself. But you're about to learn what really happened in that room, and why it signed Rasputin's death warrant. The healing of Alexei transformed Rasputin from a curious mystic into the most powerful uncrowned man in Russia. But with that power came a terrible knowledge that would make him both indispensable and impossibly dangerous. You see, Rasputin had discovered the royal family's deepest shame. Not just that the heir was sick, but that the entire genetic line was compromised. Through his intimate access to the family, he learned the full scope of their hereditary nightmare. Queen Victoria, Alexandra's grandmother, had been a carrier of hemophilia. The disease had spread through her descendants like a genetic poison, affecting royal families across Europe. Alexandra herself was a carrier. Every son she bore had a 50% chance of inheriting the death sentence. But in Russia, this wasn't just a medical problem. It was a political catastrophe waiting to happen. The concept of divine right, the belief that royal blood carried God's blessing, was the cornerstone of Tsarist authority. If the Russian people discovered that their royal family carried cursed blood, that the future emperor was a genetic defective, the revolution wouldn't wait for Lenin. Rasputin understood this, and he used it. Letters discovered decades later reveal the true scope of his manipulation. He didn't just heal Alexei, he made himself the only one who could heal Alexei. Every time the boy suffered a bleeding episode, only Rasputin could stop it. Every crisis became proof of his divine power. Modern psychologists recognize the pattern: induced dependency through controlled relief. Rasputin would often predict when Alexei would fall ill, because he had learned to read the subtle signs that preceded bleeding episodes. To the desperate royal family, this looked like prophecy. But here's the truly sinister part. Rasputin began to experiment. He understood that stress could trigger bleeding episodes in hemophiliacs. A raised voice, an emotional shock, even excitement, could start internal hemorrhaging. So Rasputin began orchestrating crises. He would create situations that agitated the boy, then arrive at the perfect moment to miraculously calm him. Each manufactured crisis strengthened his hold over the family. The Tsarina, consumed by maternal terror and religious fervor, became utterly dependent on him. She wrote to Rasputin, "My dear, never leave us. Without you, we cannot exist." What she didn't know was that she was writing her empire's death sentence. By 1914, as World War I plunged Russia into chaos, Rasputin had become a shadow emperor. Ministers were appointed and dismissed based on his recommendations. Military strategies were influenced by his visions. The governance of the world's largest empire was being shaped by a peasant who held one terrifying card. He alone knew how to keep the air alive. But knowledge is a double-edged weapon. And Rasputin was about to learn that some secrets are too dangerous to possess. The Russian nobility watched in horror as their empire crumbled under the influence of what they saw as a deranged peasant. But they didn't understand the real source of his power. They saw superstition where there was calculation, mysticism where there was manipulation. Prince Felix Yusupov, one of the richest men in Russia, began to organize what he called the salvation of the motherland. A conspiracy of nobles, politicians, and even members of the royal family united around one goal: the elimination of Rasputin. But they weren't just planning to kill a man. They were planning to destroy the keeper of Russia's most dangerous secret. December 1916. The conspiracy reaches its final phase. But as Yusupov and his co-conspirators prepare their trap, they have no idea they're about to make a fatal mistake. They think they're saving Russia from a mad monk. In reality, they're about to destroy the one man who could have saved the Romanov dynasty. Because Rasputin had one final card to play, a secret so devastating that even he hadn't dared to use it. A revelation that could have changed the course of history, but he would die before he could reveal it. December 29th, 1916. The Yusupov Palace on the Moika River. The trap is set. Prince Felix Yusupov, descendant of Tatar Khans and one of Russia's most powerful aristocrats, has spent weeks planning this moment. Joining him in the conspiracy, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, the Tsar's own cousin, Vladimir Purishkevich, a fanatical monarchist politician, and Dr. Stanislav Lazovert, whose medical knowledge would prove essential. The plan seems simple. Lure Rasputin to the palace with the promise of meeting Yusupov's beautiful wife Irina. Poison him with cyanide-laced cakes and wine. Make it look like an accident, but they've underestimated their target. Rasputin arrives at the palace just after midnight, dressed in his finest clothes, a silk shirt given to him by the Tsarina, velvet trousers, and his trademark heavy boots. He's in high spirits, joking with Yusupov about the promised meeting with Irina. What the conspirators don't know is that Rasputin has sensed something. His peasant cunning, honed by years of navigating palace intrigue, has detected danger. He's taken precautions they can't imagine. The basement room is set like a stage. Cakes laced with enough cyanide to kill 5 men sit on a table. Wine glasses prepared with additional poison gleam in the lamplight. Yusupov plays his role perfectly, chatting casually while encouraging Rasputin to eat and drink. Rasputin takes a cake, then another. He drains a glass of wine, then asks for more. The minutes tick by. 10 minutes, 20, 30. Nothing happens. Yusupov's hands begin to shake. Upstairs, the other conspirators pace frantically. The poison should have killed Rasputin within minutes. Instead, he sits calmly, asking when he'll meet the princess, occasionally glancing at his pocket watch. Modern toxicologists would later theorize that Rasputin's legendary alcohol tolerance might have diluted the poison's effect. Others suggest his heavily lined stomach, scarred by years of excessive drinking, might have slowed absorption. But there's another possibility, one that the conspirators never considered. What if Rasputin knew? What if the man who had spent years reading the subtle signs of human behavior, who could predict a hemophiliac's bleeding episodes, who had mastered the art of psychological manipulation, had read the signs of betrayal? Contemporary accounts describe Rasputin as unusually subdued that evening, despite his joking manner. He repeatedly checked his watch. He asked several times about Irina's whereabouts, and witnesses later noted that while he consumed the cakes and wine, he did so slowly, in small amounts. By 2:30 a.m., Yusupov's nerves had snapped. Claiming he needed to check on his wife, he rushed upstairs to consult with his co-conspirators. "The devil won't die," he whispered frantically. Grand Duke Dmitri handed him a revolver. "Then finish it another way." Yusupov returned to the basement, his hand trembling as he concealed the weapon. But when he entered the room, he found Rasputin examining a crystal crucifix, seemingly fascinated by its craftsmanship. "Felix," Rasputin said without looking up, "you'd better look at this crucifix and say a prayer." The words sent ice through Yusupov's veins. Did Rasputin know? Was this a warning? Or a prophecy? What happened next would be debated for decades. According to Yusupov's account, he shot Rasputin in the chest at point-blank range. The mystic collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. Yusupov checked for a pulse, found none, and declared the deed done. But as the conspirators celebrated upstairs, planning how to dispose of the body, something impossible happened. Rasputin's eyes opened. Yusupov, returning to the basement to retrieve the body, found himself face to face with a man who should have been dead. Rasputin's eyes blazed with fury. He lunged forward, his hands closing around Yusupov's throat. "Felix! Felix! I will tell the Tsarina everything!" The words rang through the palace like a death knell. Even dying, Rasputin was threatening to reveal something. But what? Yusupov broke free and fled upstairs, screaming for help. The other conspirators rushed down to find Rasputin crawling toward the courtyard, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. Purishkevich fired 4 shots. 2 found their target. Rasputin collapsed face down in the snow, but even then it wasn't over. They beat him with clubs. They wrapped his body in cloth and chains. They drove to the Malaya Nevka River and threw him through a hole in the ice. 3 days later, when they pulled his body from the frozen water, the autopsy revealed the most chilling detail of all. Rasputin had died from drowning. Despite the poison, despite the bullets, despite the beating, he had still been alive when they threw him into that dark water. His final act was to claw at the ice above him, trying desperately to break free. But death had finally claimed the man who seemed to cheat it so many times. Or so they thought. The conspirators believed they had saved Russia. Instead, they had doomed it. News of Rasputin's murder spread through St. Petersburg like wildfire. But the official reaction wasn't what the conspirators expected. Rather than gratitude for removing a corrupting influence, they faced the Tsar's cold fury. Nicholas II wasn't mourning a mystic. He was mourning the death of his son's protector. You see, the royal family understood what the conspirators didn't. Rasputin's death sentence was also Alexei's death sentence. Without the man who could mysteriously halt the boy's bleeding episodes, the heir to the throne was living on borrowed time. The Tsarina Alexandra plunged into inconsolable grief, but her despair went deeper than the loss of a spiritual advisor. She had lost the one person who could keep her son alive. Her letters from this period reveal a woman consumed by terror. Now there is no one to help Alexei when he bleeds. God has abandoned us. But the true catastrophe wasn't medical, it was political. With Rasputin dead, the carefully maintained secret of Alexei's condition began to unravel. The mystic had been more than a healer. He had been the guardian of the dynasty's most dangerous weakness. His presence had provided cover for the boy's frequent absences from public life, his mysterious illnesses, his careful isolation from potential injury. Within weeks of Rasputin's death, rumors began circulating through St. Petersburg's elite. Why had the royal family been so dependent on a peasant mystic? What hold had he possessed over them? Why was the Tsarevich so rarely seen in public? The answer, when it finally emerged, shattered the divine mystique of Romanov rule. Modern historians point to Rasputin's murder as the beginning of the end for Imperial Russia, but they focus on the political chaos, the loss of the Tsarina's spiritual anchor, the alienation of the royal family from the nobility. They miss the deeper truth. Rasputin's death exposed the genetic flaw at the heart of the dynasty. By March 1917, as revolution consumed the streets of Petrograd, whispers of the cursed royal blood spread through the crowds. The Tsar's abdication wasn't just political, it was biological. The people had lost faith not just in Nicholas as a ruler, but in the Romanov bloodline itself. The Bolsheviks, seizing power 8 months later, understood the propaganda value of this revelation. They publicized Alexei's condition as proof that the old order was literally diseased, that royal blood carried not divine blessing, but genetic corruption. But here's where the story takes its darkest turn. Among Rasputin's personal effects, discovered after his death, investigators found something that terrified even the revolutionaries: detailed notes about the genetic histories of European royal families. Rasputin hadn't just known about Alexei's haemophilia, he had traced the spread of the disease through multiple dynasties. He had mapped the web of genetic defects that connected the royal houses of Britain, Germany, Spain, and Russia. He had documented evidence that could have brought down not just the Romanovs, but the entire concept of hereditary monarchy across Europe. These documents disappeared into Soviet archives, then into Russian state security files. For over a century, they remained classified at the highest levels, because Rasputin had discovered something that modern genetics would later confirm. The European royal families weren't just related by marriage and politics. They were one extended, inbred genetic disaster, and he had planned to use this knowledge. Letters found decades later reveal Rasputin's growing ambition in his final months. He spoke of revealing great truths that would reshape the world. He hinted at knowledge that could bring down kings and raise up the common man. The conspiracy to kill him wasn't just about removing a corrupt influence from the Russian court. It was about stopping a genetic whistleblower who threatened the foundation of monarchy itself. But in killing Rasputin, the conspirators ensured that his most dangerous secret would survive him, hidden in archives, passed between intelligence services, waiting. Today, over a century after that frozen night on the Malaya Nevka, Russia still guards the secret that killed Rasputin. The Soviet Union fell. The Cold War ended. State archives have been opened and classified documents released, but the files containing Rasputin's genetic research remain sealed in the deepest vaults of Russian state security. Why? Because the implications go far beyond historical curiosity. Rasputin's documentation didn't just expose the genetic flaws of extinct royal dynasties, it revealed patterns of hereditary power that persist today. Modern genetic analysis has confirmed what Rasputin intuited through careful observation. Power tends to concentrate within genetically related groups. Political dynasties, industrial families, even criminal organizations show patterns of inherited traits that go beyond wealth and influence. What Rasputin discovered, using nothing but peasant cunning and access to royal medical records, was a principle that would later revolutionize our understanding of political power. Genetics is destiny, even for those who claim to rule by divine right. The man they called the Mad Monk wasn't mad at all. He was perhaps the first political geneticist, a figure so far ahead of his time that his insights threatened not just individual rulers, but the entire concept of inherited power. His murder wasn't the elimination of a corrupt mystic. It was the assassination of a man who had discovered that the emperor had no clothes, and that the nakedness was written in his DNA. But here's the most chilling part of this story. Rasputin's final prediction, shouted as bullets tore through his body, wasn't about his own death. According to witnesses, his last coherent words were a prophecy about the royal family's fate. If I die, they will not survive the year. He was wrong about the timeline. The Romanovs lasted 18 months after his death, but his deeper prediction proved terrifyingly accurate. The family that had depended on him to hide their genetic secret didn't just lose their throne. They lost their lives. July 17, 1918. A basement in Ekaterinburg. The last Tsar, his wife, his 4 daughters, and his hemophiliac son were executed by Bolshevik firing squad. The genetic flaw that Rasputin had managed for 6 years, the secret that had made him indispensable and ultimately cost him his life, died with young Alexei in that cellar. Or did it? Recent DNA analysis of the Romanov remains has revealed something that would have fascinated Rasputin. The hemophilia gene wasn't just a royal curse, it was a marker for a much larger pattern of genetic relationship between European ruling families. The same laboratories that confirmed the identity of the executed Romanovs have traced genetic connections between royal bloodlines that span centuries. What Rasputin pieced together through observation and documentation, modern science has proven through DNA sequencing. He was right. European royalty was one vast, interconnected, genetically compromised family tree, and in the files that Russia still won't release, locked away in archives that remain classified to this day, lies the full scope of what he discovered. The secret that killed Rasputin wasn't just about one sick boy or one dying dynasty. It was about the genetic truth that would have ended the age of kings if they hadn't killed the messenger first. But truth has a way of surviving even its discoverers. Somewhere in the depths of Russian state security, Rasputin's final secret waits. The question isn't whether it will be revealed. The question is, what will happen when it is? Because if history teaches us anything, it's that the most dangerous secrets aren't the ones we don't know. They're the ones someone doesn't want us to know. And sometimes, those secrets are worth killing for, even a century later. The truth about Rasputin's murder reveals more than historical conspiracy. It exposes the genetic foundations of political power itself. In killing the man who knew too much, the Russian nobility didn't save their empire. They guaranteed its destruction. And in the archives of modern Russia, that same dangerous knowledge waits, as explosive today as it was in 1916. Some secrets are too dangerous to reveal. Others are too dangerous to keep hidden. The legacy of Grigory Rasputin, mystic, manipulator, and political geneticist, continues to shape the world we live in today. We just don't know it yet.